Right, morning everybody. Yet again, another Wednesday has come around. We've got what I believe is another insightful webinar. This is a webinar that we've done, I think, a couple of times through last year, and thought that it was worth covering again for an ever-increasing audience that we're attracting to these. So, as I say, great to have you guys with us, and I'll run through quickly what we're going to be chatting about shortly. By way of just a bit of etiquette, you guys will be used to this now. Feel free to keep your videos off if you want to. Do keep your mics on mute. It can be quite distracting if your mic gets turned on and you're merrily having a conversation. So do make sure your mics continue to be on mute for the duration of the presentation. And do feel free to use the chat box to ask questions. We'll run through the presentation and then we'll try and leave, kind of 15 minutes at the end for question answering, bit of Q&A. So do put any questions that you've got and I'll answer those at the end. And do remember that all of our webinars here are recorded. They're put up on YouTube pretty much the same day. There will be a slight tweak to that coming up, which I'll mention as of next week's webinar. But do subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got loads and loads and loads of videos on there now, and you can watch this at your leisure if you have to drop off during the next hour. And I promise you that I'll get done by 11 o'clock. All of our time is valuable. I won't run over. So today's webinar, this webinar is actually based around a book that I wrote in 2019, which summarized the last kind of 13, 14 years worth of experience that I've got in the sustainable building sector. And we've called it Smart Low Energy Building Design, Getting It Right First Time. And what I've tried to do here in this particular form of webinar is share with you some really critical kind of different or alternative ways of thinking or being aware of fundamentals of low energy building design. And we've split the presentation in half. So we cover the first half looking at kind of changes and different processes and things to be aware of. And then the second half is more kind of project related, how you can improve the stages of a project around sustainable design. And the whole premise of this is me sharing with you the key information that I've learned, sometimes the easy way, sometimes the hard way, over the last 13 years, so that you can get projects right first time. There's not a lot of time to be making mistakes at the minute, and the more that we can share with you, the better. So before we get into that, again, another reminder about our Meshwork platform. Increasingly, more and more of you will have received invites to join the platform. The community is growing. We've got a load of really exciting announcements to make. We'll be putting a lot of exclusive, short kind of bite-sized webinar content on the Meshwork over the next couple of months, which you will only be able to get there. We're going to start doing clinic sessions and all kinds of things. So do keep your eye out for that. If you want to register your interest and be part of it when it launches on the 7th of April, which is a week today, then do feel free to visit the holding page that we've got at the moment. We would love to have you on there. Enough about that. The next thing I will cover off just for the new people on the call is what Mesh Energy is about. So just 30 seconds on that. We are independent and holistic energy consultants in a nutshell. We deal with any type and size of building. We're a practice based in Surrey, but we cover the entire of the UK. We've done projects in Europe and even in the States. And fundamentally, we are all about kind of partnering and collaborating with design practices to help you deliver sustainable buildings more efficiently, effectively, more successfully, and really helping you guys learn as you go along, learn from all of our experience. I think combined as a practice, we've now got well over a century's worth of sustainable design experience, and we would love to share that with you on your particular project, regardless of its scale or its complexity. So that's what we do in a nutshell. And do check out the website mesh-energy.com for more information as well. So to put this presentation just into a bit of kind of context, the reason I actually wrote this, and as I've presented it a couple of times now, and this is the third time, is as we'll all be aware, the various industries are changing, not least because of the last year gone by, but the built environment is changing rapidly. Sustainability is one of the #1 priorities there, and there will be a lot of rapid change, and that is scary for a lot of people, but the blunt fact is that it's happening and it needs to happen. A lot of us can learn very effectively from one another if we ask the right questions, and also as part of sustainability and the built environment evolving, client desires are evolving as well. I think all of our priorities over the last year have changed, at least in some degree, and I think health and well-being, air quality, the spaces where we live and work have become more important than ever. And I think for that reason, clients' desires about sustainability and doing the right thing for the planet have really moved on, leaps and bounds, which is no bad thing, but it does, of course, create pressures for design teams trying to deliver buildings against those increasing client desires. There are also kind of design team pressures. So if we look inside our practices within our teams, or just look at ourselves, there is a lot of information floating around, a huge amount of information about sustainability and what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. It's hard enough already for the architects that are on this call. It's hard enough for you guys already to do your jobs, and you're expected to learn about all these new things. So there's a risk of information overload and increasing the risk on projects and dropping the ball. And I think there's also a big change because of the amount of information that does have to be shared and complexity of projects. We're moving kind of from less silo thinking to a more collaborative environment for designing buildings, as I say, of any scale. And if you're not used to working that way, that can be a tricky transition, but it's certainly one which has a huge amount of advantages and very, very, very few disadvantages. So if you're, that can create its own pressures also. But also, I guess more importantly, is if you don't design sustainable buildings in the kind of the right way, and some of you unfortunately will have come across this, you end up with poor results, and that can manifest itself in a number of ways, which is kind of ultimately wasted money and real deep depths of client kind of frustration. I've put shattered dreams on here. I think certainly for some domestic clients, let's say who are building their dream home, their end of life home, there's a huge amount of aspiration that's put into those. And when things don't turn out the way that they'd hoped, particularly around sustainable buildings and running costs and doing the right thing, that's massively disappointing. And so these results we will have all come across, whether you've done a sustainable building or not quite getting there. And sustainability just focuses that, brings that into very, very sharp focus. And hopefully the point of me putting this presentation together is to help you guys improve your chances of success. So over the next kind of 40 minutes or so, we'll be looking at these kind of main areas really. We split into two: thinking differently and doing better. So we'll cover off what I would classify as kind of energy basics, looking about building a better team, talking about making and losing money on sustainable projects, and looking at a really important thing, which is quite close to my heart, is goals and success for sustainable projects. And then the second half is about finding the right path for your sustainable project, looking at strategy, finding the right people to be working with, and being specific about the solution that you actually need. Focusing on detail once you get onto site, and then looking at closing that loop out and looking at testing and measuring and continued learning. So without further ado, let's get into it. So part one, thinking differently. And it's really important to understand some of the principles and fundamentals of sustainability. It's easy, there's a lot of stuff being talked about sustainability, but you must stop and think about, or at least at the very least understand the basic principles of energy usage within buildings to make any kind of meaningful moves on your project. And what I mean by fundamentals is a few things. And the first is that the best chance of success for more complex projects, which sustainable projects are, as elegant as you make a sustainable low energy build, it does require some decent systems thinking, but also as building complexity generally increases, understanding that designing a building in a linear fashion, and what I mean by that is the client tells the architect what to do, the architect tells the structural engineer what needs to be done and how the house or office building or manufacturing facility needs to hang together, and then they tell the M&E guys what needs doing, and then etc, 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 it moves on down the line. That's historically a lot of projects have been run that way, and that just doesn't work in today's design environment. You must have a think more about parallel thinking, getting people on board sooner, getting the right design team members involved earlier on in the planning to be able to contribute to a more elegant and efficient design. So being able to understand that transition between teams and thinking from linear to parallel thinking is absolutely critical. The other important piece here is understanding that energy usage or bits of a building's design which leads to different types of energy usage are not equal. There is an energy hierarchy which we'll come into, which we've shown in other presentations. But this simple little graphic that I've got on the screen here shows you the kind of the rough percentages between how space heating compares to hot water in a domestic setting, how appliance usage compares to these things, how lighting and cooking make a very, very small contribution. And just space heating, if you break that out, is obviously contributed between a lot of things, you know, drafts, walls, roofs, floors, openings, all of those things contribute to the amount of heating usage that you use. And so if you broad brush and spend equal amounts of money trying to tackle all of these things in the newer existing build, there's going to be a lot of wastage. And we'll come on to that. So just understanding, which I hope all of you do on the call, understanding that energy usage or loss from a building is not equal is fundamental to being intelligent about how you design low energy buildings. The energy hierarchy we'll come on to on the next slide, I believe, and then marginal gains, understanding that sometimes it's the small things that are the important things, like in many other aspects of life, that the small things that you do well can have massive, massive gains. And a number of really critical small things and adjustments and details and execution can have a disproportionate benefit on the project. So again, getting a better understanding of those is absolutely critical to make sure your time is best used, your client's money is best used, and you put yourself on the right track to better design. And this is the energy hierarchy. We used to have this as a sketch. We've tidied this up now. So generally speaking, this is an inverted pyramid, and you start at the top and you move to the bottom. And the general gist is that your money is better spent higher up in this hierarchy before moving to the next level. But not only should you be spending your money at the upper bands of this pyramid before you move down, the fact that your opportunity to reduce energy usage decreases as you move down the triangle as well. So thinking about that logically, why would you start in the middle of this pyramid, inverted pyramid, or at the bottom when your money is best spent at the top and you can have the biggest impact on the project? And if you've ever heard of the term, you know, kind of biggest bang for your buck, this is definitely a diagram which points to where you should be spending, most intelligently spending your money to get the biggest bang for your buck. So at the top here, again, hopefully, I don't want to teach you guys to suck eggs, but it's always good to be reminded of these things. Building location, orientation, and form is critical. You know, where the building sits in its landscape, the shape of that building, its location, which often you can do very little about on a macro scale, but certainly on a micro scale, you can change the location of a building on site in many cases. And once that die is set for the form, the orientation, and the building location, you fixed a fair proportion of the energy usage of the building in its place. And obviously, once you move to the next stage, you know, you kind of tick that off, and then you can move to focusing on the next one. So once you've done that top band, then you're looking at improving the U values for the building. How far and how sensible is it to go super duper low there, and there will be a sweet spot of money and effort and space that you get to. Then looking at air tightness and ventilation, how can you reduce drafts? How can you recover heat energy? I'm talking about mechanical ventilation, heat recovery in new buildings. Looking at losses through that and minimizing losses through air tightness and ventilation is the next critical thing. And then often, I can tell you that the next smartest way is renewable technology. And you'll have had a number of clients, if you've been involved in sustainable projects, which jump immediately to the renewable technology bit and don't care too much for the other upper bands. And it's a bit like sticking a sticky plaster over a gaping wound. It's going to have little effect, and you're going to be pretty disappointed with the results. But if you do look at renewable technology, once you've tackled all these other parts of the building, you can start really making quite a considerable difference. And also your heating system and your hot water system can be smaller as well. So you spend less capital money. Appliances and lights and then actual in usage are right at the bottom. But these top 4 stages are mega critical to reducing the vast bulk of a building's energy usage. And so I've put this up here for your reference. A lot of this is based on building physics, and it's worth understanding that there's no magic wand. We're all driven by thicknesses, material performance, air tightness performance, and things like that. So don't believe that you can skip over any of these chunks and make any real progress. I'm telling you that you need to start at the top and work your way down to really get the very best out of the project. So having understood the energy hierarchy and the fact that energy usage in a building is not equal, the next thing to understand is that your team for low energy projects, again, is super duper important. This is another really critical part of the chain. We'll have all been involved in projects where you've got weaker team members, you've got team members you really wish weren't on the project, and team members who are worth their weight in gold, and you are so glad to have them on your team. And the reason that team working and collaboration is becoming more and more important is because, as I said before, the complexity of low energy design buildings and just the complexity of houses in general. So the status quo, and this is of course a broad brush statement here, there are a lot of people and a lot of assessors and a lot of specialists who work in their own little silos. There are architect teams who think they know everything and they work in their own little silo. There are structural engineers who think they know everything and they work in their own little silo, and they produce what they produce, and the rest of the team's gonna put up with it. Hopefully they won't be in business for very much longer, because that is not what modern building design needs. But there are still people that operate like that and teams that operate like that. So when we think about how this needs to change, fundamentally you need a new A team. And what I mean by that is not, we're not reinventing the wheel here, but you need to be more careful about the people that you select for sustainable building design. Hopefully ones that already have experience of low energy building design projects, or particular, let's just take passive house off the top of my head. Of course, if you've got people on your team who've done passive houses before and you're trying to build a passive house, that's pretty useful. Compared to people who are just used to doing refurbs on listed buildings, and you're trying to do your first passive house. So finding the right educated team is right. But when you actually look at the specialists, drilling down and spending some extra time working with those individuals to make sure the right team is selected is fundamental. And this may come as a surprise, but we all have in our control the opportunity to choose what clients we work with. And certainly for sustainable projects, clients can be pushy about the sustainability of their project, or they can be very, very resistant. I guess one extreme is you've got a homeowner who wants to build something off grid in the middle of Scotland and they want it to be using no energy. And the other end of the spectrum is you've got a client who doesn't want to do anything and they roll their eyes every time you mention, I don't know, a 10% carbon reduction requirement from building controls. In an ideal world, you would be working with the former, not the latter of those two clients. it is so much more satisfying to work with a truly engaged client who gets sustainability, even if they're not extreme. They understand the benefits. They trust you to guide them through that, and they understand the long-term benefits. So look for an engaged client. Try not to do this with a client who, try not to force it. For a client who's not up for it and they don't need to do it because of regulatory reasons, don't force it. Look out for those engaged clients who can really invest their time and trust the team to deliver. An enlightened architect, what I mean by that is an architect who gets sustainability, gets the benefits, is keen on learning, bettering themselves, is keen to understand that they don't know everything and that they need other specialists to help them along and optimize their design for sustainable reasons. An independent energy consultant, of course, we're biased, but we are finding that in the early stages of project design, things like overheating, embodied carbon analysis, just meeting increasingly stringent building regulations. London Plan is a classic example. A lot of these, a lot of the bars for energy consultancy or sustainability are rising and rising and rising, and you must reach out to an energy consultant earlier and earlier in the projects. Try not to be tempted to work with manufacturers or installers who pretend that they are going to give you sustainable building advice because they're trying to sell you a product in stage 4 or 5 of your building design. You need to be finding independent energy consultants. A pragmatic structural engineer, maybe pragmatic is or isn't the right word, but what I'm talking about here is a structural engineer who is happy looking at other construction methods, bar steel and concrete or timber frame construction. There is, the more experience that structural engineers have, the more that they can bring to the party with, CLT, hempcrete. Not saying the building has to be built out of that, but that experience is really, really increasingly more important and gives your team more options to build the right building going forward. So maybe a more open-minded structural engineer. Great project management, more than ever, great project or superstar project managers are needed on projects. And a modern builder. And what I mean by a modern builder is a builder who, again, gets what sustainable construction is all about, gets the attention to detail, gets what you mean when you say the airtightness of this building has got to be better than 3 cubic meters per square meter per hour. A builder that is dedicated to delivering a high performing building, and again is open to other construction techniques. Isn't a builder that's been around for 50 years and will only build brick and block cavity walls houses and kind of ignores you when you start talking about other more progressive ways of constructing buildings. So look out for these. I mean, there's an increasing number of builders who can help you out here, and this is what I mean by the A team. We're not talking about brand new team members per se, but a different type, a higher level of team member going forward. Making and losing money. This is now more than ever. Money and capital expenditure is at risk on sustainable projects. The opportunity to waste money is ferocious if the planning's wrong, if you don't follow the energy hierarchy. Likewise, the opportunity to save considerable amounts of money with the right design process is there. But believe me, it's there. But it's easy, like in everything, it's easy to waste and spend money. It travels out of our bank accounts far easier than it stays in there, and that's no different for sustainable construction. I've mentioned the relationship between spending money and the kind of the mesh energy hierarchy. Ideally, you'd spend more money on the maybe not necessarily the form and location of the building, but certainly the fabric, the air tightness, and then the renewable technology. So there's a way of spending money in a building to make sure it goes the furthest and reduces the lifetime cost. And there are still government subsidies around. In fact, today, the commercial renewable heat incentive comes to an end, but the domestic renewable heat incentive is still open for another year. Sadly, the Green Homes Grant has been axed. That didn't last very long. but they're pushing, and there will be subsidies going forward in various forms into the future. So there's money to be made and money to be lost. I guess it is worth, to be honest here, there are extra kind of low energy consultancy costs for a sustainable building. We'll all know that increased effort has to go into kind of planning energy statements and calculations to keep planners increasingly happy, you know, in overheating statements, energy statements and various other paperwork is increasingly being asked for more and more and more. If any of you have been on a BREEAM project, particularly outstanding or excellent, you'll know how much money and paperwork is needed before going into planning on those. And sustainable, you know, there are these other sustainable elements which do cost a bit more money up front. Early stage consultancy, again, we've talked about this through various presentations that we've done. There is a big investment to be made here. You don't have to go in heavy at the beginning of the project, but certainly getting earlier stage consultancy before you would normally get it is proving very, very beneficial. I would say for us at the moment, probably 30 or 40% of our clients are coming to us before planning to make sure their planning application is as robust as it needs to be. 18 months ago, it was probably 5–10% tops. And I would imagine in about 18 months time, probably 90% of our clients would come to us before they've got clients. So people are getting the idea and they're really seeing the benefits there. Improved building fabric, you know, there's no getting away from it. If we stick with the energy hierarchy, spending money on a building's fabric to get that down, to get that performing well, get that optimized is money well spent. To a degree, there's always when you go extreme with it, but certainly improved building fabric is an extra cost that I know clients sometimes grumble about, but it's often because they don't understand the true benefit, and historically they've got a certain amount of money set aside for the building fabric. And then renewable and ventilation technology, you know, low energy technologies, because of the engineering in them, is more expensive. They're better engineered. You're not just burning gas, you're not just burning oil, you're not just burning LPG, you're not just turning an electric fan heater on. These are highly engineered bits of kit. As a result, they use a huge amount of natural energy and proportionally very little electricity. But these things do cost money as a result. And that's why they are down the energy hierarchy. Spend your money on the passive elements of a building before you get into the technology, because technology, as we all know, will break and you'll have to replace it. So goals and success, just to kind of finish up this section really, I've got a couple of things on this. This, as I say, is kind of one close to my heart. And I think this is where, as a practice, we've come furthest over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years. And I think it's the understanding that thinking is hard work. We all like doing the same thing. But we've now come to a point where if we don't think, if we don't progress, we're going to get left behind. But knowing that doing a bit more intelligent thinking can really unlock some massive opportunities should be enough of an incentive to just spend a bit more time thinking and thinking with a client as well, and not just about thinking in isolation, but getting a client to think, getting your design team to think. And a lot of you probably will not have done this, but understanding why a client, and I mean any client, domestic, commercial, not-for-profit, whatever, community, understanding why a client is embracing sustainability beyond just because they're being told to by the planners is becoming increasingly more critical. And this is kind of hearts and minds stuff as I get onto. If you and your team can understand why a client is embracing sustainability, I promise you it will change the way in which you design buildings and the way in which the team talks and communicates, and how goals and aspirations are set for the benefit of everybody. A bit like anything really. If we better understand what's ahead of us, we feel more confident, we can give better ideas. You know, there's less grey areas to kind of push to one side and try and tackle. and risk reduces. So there's huge team benefits, or design team benefits and client benefits to understanding the why of a project. But the other key thing to pick up on here is, if you don't know why a client is doing what they're doing, sustainability or otherwise, you cannot define and measure a project success. Generally speaking, if a client is paying you a fee, the success of the project, really they define that. You don't define that. It may be the most beautiful architectural thing you've ever seen, but if a client doesn't care about that and they care about something else, it's unlikely that if you deliver a beautiful building but you miss their definition of success, you're not going to get a good write-up. And so it's critical to understand that. Now, part of the problem is that most projects are by definition failures. And the reason I say that is because this why is not understood. And if you don't understand the why, success can never be understood or defined. And if success is never defined, success can never be achieved. And that's a kind of a strong statement, but actually, if you're honest with yourself, I think that's as fair as it can be. Just because you see something as successful doesn't necessarily mean the client does. And we should all be focused around what the client is doing here, and making sure that it's successful for them and it's successful for you. But if you had to choose one success, it should be that of the client. So the question is, how do we do this? How do we not make most project failures by better defining and measuring success? And we put this simple proper pyramid together at the minute. And it starts with the why at the top, which is a very kind of emotive, kind of an emotional thing. And then it moves into kind of more measurable, what we call the guerrilla goal, and then kind of grassroots goals at the bottom, which is very much a measurable thing for the design team. So this is really kind of like a roadmap. And as I say, a lot of us deal with these bottom two bands, but struggle with the top one. And then an example of kind of these emotional big why questions that you might be asking in the first meeting with a client, or at the very latest, the second meeting with the client is, what's your big why? And the client says, when they really, really think about it deep down, they're talking about a responsibility to the next generation. They're talking about providing a comfortable environment for my family in all seasons. And you can't quantify that, really, you can't quantify those things. They are warm, kind of fuzzy statements, but they mean a lot. These kind of safety for a family, or health and well-being, those kinds of things. So getting those out of a client is really, really important. Now, where clients often start is with token suggestions like, I want to build something off grid, I want to build a passive house, I want to build a super eco home or an eco home, or a client comes to you and says something in a similar vein. We've all heard things like that if we've talked about sustainability with clients. So if a client ever says that to you, they will have said that to you for a reason. And so go back up the pyramid, uncover that why, and then come back to this middling one and figure out what that means. Does the client actually mean those things that they're saying? And if they do, let's try and quantify them. Because it's this bottom stage which means something to the design team. Are we talking about a certain SAP rating? Are we talking about a certified passive house which has numbers and goals associated with it? Are we talking about having energy costs below a certain threshold? Are we talking about having, it meeting REBA 2030, ticking all the boxes, and so you've got embodied carbon numbers there, you've got health and well-being targets. Those are the things that mean something to the design team, and they can be distilled from these kind of fuzzy emotional things at the top of the triangle. So that's fundamentals. Let's talk about some practical kind of success steps through a project. Now, this kind of roughly follows the kind of the main REBA stages. I'm not going to go through every REBA stage, but the first here is kind of feasibility. So your strategy, the direction that sustainable project is going to take. And the main point of a feasibility stage is figuring out what could be done and what should be done. Focusing the client's mind on costs, risks, benefits, getting the client's head around where their money is best spent, and being a bit more upfront with the numbers. I know it's tricky at early stages of a project to commit to numbers, but I think, again, increasingly in these project types, we have got to put a bit more on the line up front and talk a bit more seriously about numbers, because, as I say, of the opportunity to spend money if the wrong strategy is taken. So strategy and spending money are very, very closely tied at the beginning of the project. And understanding that the feasibility, by the end of the feasibility stage, the client's got a really clear idea of a strategy and the reasons why they're going down that route. Now, you have to help them from an architectural design point of view. If you've got other specialists involved, this is where they really come into their own, because you can benefit from their experience and their take on the strategy and have a holistic strategy put together rather than just the design strategy. So you've got design, you've got energy you need to be thinking about, you've got structure you need to be thinking about, and all these things are becoming ever more intertwined. So the power of a clear energy strategy is amazing, and the client buy-in and the team buy-in you can get by the end of that feasibility stage is so powerful. And the benefits are you get big questions asked. If you push feasibility further up, you get big questions answered, so there's less gray areas. You optimize the technology or the strategy solutions earlier on, and there's more, as I say, there's more kind of financial clarity. And let's remind ourselves of the cost of change. So feasibility happens in these kind of early, very early design stages. And what's fascinating about as you move through design into detailed design and on-site into construction is there are two things that radically change as you go through here. One is the amount of options available to you, and the other is cost. So in these very early stages, when you're just throwing around bits of paper, when you're in team meetings, there's no real design that's been done, but you've maybe got some concepts together, lot of opportunity, and the cost is negligible. And if you don't manage to get certain questions answered and don't do this thinking, which I said is hard work, and don't put yourself and the client through the ringer and get the right team together, you start eking down this design phase, and the cost starts creeping up. People are doing work on maybe suboptimal strategies or stuff that isn't in the long-term benefit of the project because this thinking hasn't been done, and your options start to fall off. Once you make certain decisions on site, whether it's floor construction, whether it's ceiling height of a building, whether it's orientation of a building, the amount of glazing that you're using, you start to lock in aspects of the building, and your options for heating, providing hot water, lighting, passively ventilating, whatever it is, start diminishing. And once you get onto site, the cost of change rockets, and your energy options become very limited very quickly if you leave them late on in the decision process. And this is ultimately what you're trying to do, looking at feasibility from a sustainability point of view, is kind of figuring out where the cost of equipment, the suitability of the sites, and the client desires and energy goals cross over. So you're aiming for this kind of hatched bit in the middle. If you're outside of this in a kind of a typical Venn diagram fashion, if the equipment cost is right and the site's suitable, but you haven't hit the client desire and energy goals, who cares? It's a failure as far as the client's concerned. Likewise, if you've got cost and desires sorted out, but it's not suitable for the site, it won't necessarily work, the solution that you're coming up with. And the other option is, your budget's blown if you take into consideration these bottom two, but fail to appreciate properly the cost of implementing the strategy. And so once you've gone through the feasibility stage, you start getting more specific. You've got the strategy together. Let's get more specific. A specification is about being specific and going out to tender and finding great installers. We have worked a lot with design teams over the last few years on getting that specification right. Being vague and being uncertain when it comes to sustainability during that stage 4 stage is a big opportunity for opening the project up to a huge cost variation. I did a project the other day, and even though we were specific about the outcome, we saw a 50% plus or minus swing on contractor returns. If you're vague about the specification, that swing will be even greater. Guys and girls will be quoting for stuff that the project doesn't need. It's their interpretation, leaves all kinds of loose ends, and that's what you're trying to avoid to give the client and your team more confidence. But also the benefit of being specific is that when you come to find installers, as I say, you'll get better, more accurate returns. But finding these five-star installers, they're few and far between, I'll be honest. There's not thousands of them. There's not even hundreds of them. There's probably tens of them in your area that could help you out. Finding them becomes increasingly easier if you've got a better specification, and it will be easier to engage them. Installers who are good at what they do know a good specification when they see it and know that that's a project that they want to get involved in. So as far as selecting these installers, give yourselves time to find installers. Don't be rushed into finding an installer. Don't be tempted to get that installer in early doors, because you need a more independent and holistic strategy than that. An installer, as good as they are, will always be biased about the products that they're putting in. Check out those accreditations and experience, the speciality of the technologies they're involved in. We're beyond, a gas boiler is a gas boiler is a gas boiler. You'll find a lot of installers who'll put in gas boilers, but a heat pump is not a heat pump is not a heat pump. There's all kinds of different types of heat pump. They all have their specialities. And so there's another level of difficulty there. And some ground source heat pump installers may not be appropriate, even though they install ground source heat pumps and your project needs a ground source heat pump. Check out referrals, make sure installers have done similar type projects of the scale that you're talking about. Check their credit worthiness. We have the ability as a company to do that, and they're increasingly helping clients out, checking credit worthiness of businesses, and make sure that installers are soft selling. The rule always goes, if somebody's trying to sell you hard, trying to give you big discounts, stop talking to them. They're a waste of time. There's a reason why they're doing that. As always, good installers and reputable installers will not rush you into a decision, and that helps with giving yourself more time. So don't rush it. And once you're on site with construction, there are some challenges with low energy construction. We've all heard about kind of modular builds and stuff, and more kind of better QA processes offsite. That's fine, but as a whole, today a lot of buildings are built on site, and a lot of the issues with sustainable buildings that are not successful comes down to build quality, attention to detail, integrated services design, and the workforce skill and the mindset of the guys on site. So taking them in turn there, the build quality is all around the detailed plans that are given to the builders in the first place. So you guys as the design team need to be up on that. You need to make sure that you're giving them the level of detail that they need. You need to make sure you've done more planning in that detailed design phase. And with the workforce skill and mindset, again, this comes down to choosing the right modern builder. There are builders and there are builders. We all want to be working with a builder who can deliver on the increasingly more tight targets for sustainable buildings, and have the right skill set and workforce who are behind getting that achieved, not just kind of papering over the cracks and hoping nobody will notice. And I think the big takeaway from construction projects, to say that we've seen gone well, is that they plan. I've seen construction projects spend another 6 months in the detailed planning design phase in order to deliver on a successful high-end sustainable building. you will easily save that time once you get onto site, and with headaches and mistakes that can't be undone if you do better planning. Super communication between the team, making sure that enough communication is being done, but not too much. Figuring out what extra lines of communication you need in order to make sure this detail gets through. And as I said, kind of killer project management, really actually making sure you've got a project manager who is on top of what is critical and can deliver the project against the detail, making sure that somebody on site is responsible for, you know, air tightness or energy efficiency. Some kind of champion on site always is a big bonus. And then kind of finally looking at kind of completion and testing at the back end of a project. I've talked about this before. I've got here the kind of the forgotten REBA stages. Post-occupancy evaluation is a big forgotten stage. I think there's a lot more awareness of it in the last 18 months, but actually learning from your design is critical, getting feedback from the client. And certainly, as we're finding, having a centralized building physics model helps with that. We're not talking about something that costs tens and tens of thousands of pounds to build. You can put a thermal model together for most domestic buildings for about £1,000 now. And it's a model that will help you with energy loss, daylighting, all kinds of other things. So you can check how the building's performing against that kind of centralized model. So closing out the circle and not forgetting REBA stages is critical. Commissioning is also glossed over a lot of the time, and making sure that, again, with a good project manager and a good commissioning strategy, having somebody look over that and making sure that's delivered is really critical. Given that there are more services in buildings, it's important that they work together and it doesn't completely flummox the clients so they start messing around with the controls. A lot of fantastic work can be undone by poor commissioning. And it's a big cause of high energy bills, even if the building is fantastically well insulated. Poor commissioning can very quickly lead to excess electricity usage, which then leads to very high electricity bills. Handover and closeout, as I say, handing over to the client is a really important stage. And as I mentioned right at the top of this slide, start doing something, start getting some kind of feedback. We're not talking about monitoring 10 different data points in every single room every 5 seconds. We're talking about a simple customer feedback questionnaire, maybe 6 months after they've been in there, maybe a year after they've been in there, just taking some simple temperature readings if you visit back at site. And you've got to ask yourself, you know, what are you afraid of here? Feedback isn't bad. It's it's a good thing, right? I mean, it's how can we ever improve if we don't get feedback? And you never know, it may be fantastic. I don't think you're putting yourselves at any more kind of risk by asking for feedback. And I would strongly encourage you, if you don't do post-occupancy feedback, that you start doing something. We had Fionn Stevenson on here a couple of weeks ago, and she was talking about the Building Performance Network and a growing bunch of people and guidance that's out there to help you along with this. So do tap into those. Just some final points here about learning, the benefits of kind of measuring and learning. You get to close up the performance gap by looking at the difference in real and theoretical performance. We will have a professional responsibility to learn from our designs and make sure we do a better job for the next client. It allows us to continually learn and understand how buildings are really used. And for those business owners on the call, it increases the growth opportunities for the business and profitability of the business going forward as well. And this was just a very simple graphic I've got here that just picks up on architects that learn and architects that don't. Architects that don't learn, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. You eventually kind of pick up bits and pieces. But like compounding any learning, architects that retain that, learn, put that into the next process, end up with this kind of exponential curve of learning and growth as they go on. So massively oversimplified, but you kind of get the idea. So key takeaways: focus on the fabric and energy loss basics of a property, understand them and do them, go through the energy hierarchy, properly understand your client aspirations and goals, come up with this detailed design document and find great installers, focus on construction detail and commissioning, and get feedback at the end of the project in order for you to properly learn from the project. If you want more information about what we've covered off here, you can buy the book on Amazon. But for those of you who don't want to buy it, you can download a free copy from the website. So if you go to our website, there's in our resources bit, there's a right first time link, and you can simply download the book. Lots to read in there, really digestible, and would of course welcome your feedback on the book. But that's it. We've got 10 minutes left. I am conscious of time. I know we've got a few questions. Hopefully that was all pretty straightforward. As I say, we'll be recording this and giving you the PDF of the presentation later on today. So let's take a look at the questions then. So Talene is asking, in the energy usage breakdown diagram you provided, what type of building is the breakdown referring to? For example, passive house homes would have a very different breakdown from a poorly insulated home in the UK. Yeah, that's right. So Talene, the breakdown that I've got there is for a typical existing domestic property that is, is kind of built today, really, or 20 years ago. It's not a passive house. Obviously, your air tightness value for a passive house would be far smaller. I think the point is here to understand that not all energy usage is equal. Heating and energy losses because of heating through the fabric of the building should be tackled first, and then looking at hot water savings, and then looking at going down that list of ones where you can save less and less should be tackled further and further down the pyramid. So hopefully that answers the question. It's just a stereotypical home. David John is asking, in regards to the A team, what do you feel is the best way to gauge or recognize who is good possible team members, and when approaching a project beforehand? What would you look for? Past results, references? That's a good question. I mean, referrals are always strong. If you have somebody who has done a sustainable project before, referrals and word of mouth are always really key. But what I would say, project experience is really critical. There's a lot of people who can talk a good game, but and I know everybody's got to start somewhere, but there is enough experience out there now that if you're doing let's take a listed building example again. Say you're doing a grade 2 listed building refurb. I personally would have more confidence working with people, a builder, an energy consultant, a structural engineer, other team members who had worked on those types of properties before and could show what they did and how they brought benefit to the party. Same with passive house. These are really particular types of building types, and passive house particularly when it comes to air tightness. You're right down there at the thin end of the wedge. It really helps talking to people who've done that before. So I would say project type and referrals. And I would tap up the network. When you're talking about referrals, don't necessarily talk about referrals from people you know. I would get referrals from people that you trust. And I know knowing people and trusting people maybe not mutually exclusive for you. But there's lots and lots of resources out there, and we would strongly suggest that you take a look, and getting the right people can set the die for good or for worse at the beginning of a project. And it's really important, again, to give yourselves time and to find those right people, because once you've kind of signed up with them, it's very difficult to get rid of them halfway through, and you just lose that continuity of the project. Again, David John has asked, do you feel architects have been previously pressured by the existing industry not to look at their buildings or learning from the problems? That's a good question. I wouldn't have said, I think based on discussions that I've had and some of the feedback that we got from Fion the other day, I don't think there's been pressure not to look at the buildings. I think there's been, for a long time, clients have run out of money by the end of the project. I think there's been a big misunderstanding about what getting feedback on buildings means. I think a lot of people associate getting building feedback with data logging, streams of data about humidity, temperature, whether the windows are open or closed, how many people are in the room, occupancy, all that kind of stuff. And what we found is that actually presents a bigger problem and adds a lot of unnecessary costs than just doing some really, really meaningful things. So I don't think there's been pressure to not measure the buildings. I think there's been just typical project pressures like cost as money has run out. But also we're all human. When we get to an end of a project, we're ready for the next one. I don't think there's been value seen in learning from a project. But I think that's becoming into sharp focus. And I think we've got the tools to learn from projects. And say with increased building modeling techniques, BIM coming along, if you've done bigger projects, there's the ability to know what the building should be doing. And then you can compare it against what it is doing. If you have nothing to compare how a building is doing against, then it's kind of, what's the point? Fine, okay, I've got some numbers and the client's happy or the client's not happy. Fine, okay, we'll make a note of that and we'll move on to the next one. So you need this kind of comparator to be able to kind of get the feedback loop rolling. I think we have those tools and we have the energy, and there's a lot of talk in the industry that is really needs to become a key part of building design, not just the fun bit at the beginning when you're doing conceptual design and getting it delivered on site and handing over the keys. There are a couple of other stages there which are really, really important. Elizabeth has asked, there is a big learning gap needed to be filled with the new net zero energy requirements between now and 2050. I think that's an understatement, Elizabeth. I wouldn't even say 2050, I'd say 2030, 2035 latest, really. Are there any courses you recommend for architects on this subject? Off the top of my head, Elizabeth, no, unfortunately not. There is no doubt various people putting course material together. I don't think that I know of any courses, but I think because of the amount of discussion that's being had about it, I think this stuff will come along sooner rather than later. I must admit, the platform that we're putting together, the Meshwork platform, is all about building that community and getting those kinds of courses on there. So we'll be keen to work with architects and other professionals and using what we know to try and put those kind of courses together. But of course, if anything comes up, we'll certainly let you know of anything. But nothing springs immediately to my mind. I think there's been a lot of rapid talk about this in a very, very short duration, and the education of that's got to catch up. But I would be amazed that by the end of the year there shouldn't be some courses on it. It is worth saying, though, that net zero carbon is nothing new. And what I mean by that is, if you're familiar with passive house principles, the mesh energy hierarchy, net zero building design is just an extension of that. So you haven't got to relearn from scratch. You've just got to take design to the next level. And you need to also better define what you mean by net zero. Are we talking about operational energy usage? Are you talking about including whole life carbon analysis as part of that? So you need to figure out and define what that means for you. Again, talk to others. There are a lot of architects. We had Joe Jack Williams on here the other day. Field and Clegg Bradley Studios do a lot of work. I know Joe is pretty prolific about talking about net zero carbon design and will continue to do so. So reach out to these people who are constantly talking about it, and I'm sure they would be willing to help you out also. Right, okay. Yeah, David, more than happy to continue the conversation. Do feel free to, anybody in fact, to email me for further information, or reply to our info@mesh-energy.com address. I'm going to wrap it up for there, guys. We're almost at 11 o'clock. Thanks very much. Just a quick reminder about next week's webinar. Next week, would you believe it, is our 50th webinar. Somehow we have got to the big round number of 50. And that webinar is going to be on why build an eco home benefits explained. And that's going to be talking about client benefits, architect design team benefits. I'm going to put some updates on there about building values, sustainable building values. There's been more and more information creeping out about the actual monetary value of a building that is sustainable. So I'm going to try and put some of that info in there as well. We can discuss around that. So again, enlightening and updated from the last time that we gave it. So join us next week for our 50th webinar. You never know, we may be able to think up some kind of quirky giveaway for the next one. You might benefit from dropping on that call also. So thank you guys, cheers for your time. I will leave it with you. Look forward to the recording on YouTube later on today, and do sign up for next week's webinar. Take care, bye.